In this video, we're going to look at how you can go about auto-retopologizing a very thin object such as a garment. Now, if you are working on a plane like this, or maybe even a terrain that is single-sided, then it can auto-retopologize it well enough, as you can see here. But on a single-sided object with openings, such as a garment, the algorithm can struggle. Same thing applies to other thin objects such as wings. In those cases, you might use a dummy copy that is a little bit thicker than what your high poly version or your end result version is. As you can see, this particular object is thick enough, but if we want to generate a nice, clean, single-sided result, obviously we can use manual retopology tools, but in this case, we may want to quickly generate an auto-retopologized version of it. And again, export out a single-sided mesh like this, because obviously this is a lot easier to cloth sim than one that is thick or one that is double-sided. So let's go ahead and get started here by creating a dummy duplicate to create a lower resolution version for auto retopo and to smooth all the high frequency detail, which we don't need until we're ready to bake. Anytime you're auto retopologizing an object, if you've got high frequency detail, you don't need auto retopo in most cases to capture that surface level detail. We need to reduce as much detail as we possibly can to make the object as simple as possible for the algorithm. Okay, I'm going to create a dummy duplicate by clicking on clone and degrade. That will reduce it from 3 million to about 700,000. I'll hide the original. If you have a really thin object and you're in voxel mode and you try to smooth, you might get some holes because it doesn't have enough voxel resolution to keep from creating those holes. In other words, it's degraded too much. So you can either keep your resolution high so that it does have enough that it doesn't create the holes, or you can give it a little bit of thickness. If you want to give it some thickness, you right click on the layer and then choose extrude. You probably want to start with a very low value. If you need to shrink in other words, reduce the thickness, you can extrude, but give it a negative value. So let's click smooth all a few times, and that will reduce a lot of that surface level detail. And we want to inspect to make sure we don't have any holes after having done that. Okay, the next thing we want to do is cap these holes on the ends of our dummy duplicate. I'll go to an orthographic view by clicking on the cube icon or the 5 key on your number pad. And I will switch to a top view, and from this point on I'll just use my hotkeys. I'll right click outside the object and drag right to zoom in. Okay. One thing we can do to cap this is we can use primitives, but then we would have to move it into place. You do have click to place, but since we have an open end here, we don't have any surface area where we want to actually place it. With that being the case, I want to use an easier and maybe a quicker method, and that is using a tool like VoxClay or maybe 2D Paint or Sphere, something like that, and using a closed spline. And I will go to a top view. And I'm just going to click to create these spline points. I don't want to get too close to the edge though. Now that I've finished the initial creation of the spline, I can hit escape. When you hover over a point, when you see it highlighted blue, you can click and drag to replace that point, or reposition it, I should say. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay. Now, the other consideration is cursor placement. If I have my cursor here, then it may create this object in 3D space way down at the bottom of this object instead of up here around the collar. So to tell 3D Coat that I want to place it around the collar, I need to hover in this area. The other thing I want to point out is the angle is a little bit important in this case, because as you can see, at a top view, my angle will be quite different because it's going to project from the camera plane. Okay, so I probably need to be at a 45-degree angle or so. Let's go back to top view and just rotate. I want to increase my depth value and my brush size probably will come into play here. I hit the enter key and we're pretty close. So that looks good to me. I don't necessarily have to make this flush. And if I do, I can always use the cutoff tool or something like that, maybe to trim that away. But in this case, I'll be fine with that. So I'll hit escape to drop that spline. And we want to reproduce that here on the bottom as well. Right click and drag right to zoom in. And then we'll try to speed this up. You can brush if you want, but I think I need a little bit more control. So I will just click to place the points and hit escape. Maybe create another one there. Okay. Now this is at a different angle as well, so I'll need to rotate just a bit. Okay. Hover my cursor here on the edge. Hit escape. And hit the S key to turn symmetry on. And in this case, I think I can go ahead and brush along the area. Escape. Hover my cursor here. And there we go. Let's hit the S key, or in this case, we just want to simply turn symmetry off, so I can hit Alt S to toggle symmetry off. Now we want to smooth once again here, smooth all, maybe once more. What we did is we capped the ends, but that left us with an empty inner portion that creates a void, and I'd like to close my volumes so that it doesn't interfere with auto retopo at all. So I'm going to right click and choose fill voids. And now it's completely solid all the way through the model. I hit my 5 key on the number pad to come out of orthographic view. So we are ready now to auto retopologize, or I can clean this up just a little bit by smoothing if I want. I'm going to go to a brush draw mode. And if you have CUDA Smooth Boost enabled, you might uncheck that because it's pretty abrupt and pretty harsh. But in this case, when I hold down the Shift key, I can smooth. I'm going to right click and drag downward to decrease the smoothing value so it's a little more subtle. Okay, easy enough. Now let's go ahead and right click and choose Auto Retopo. We'll set our estimated poly count. In this case, 4,000 should work on this model fairly well. And the rest I'll leave at the default values. Hit OK. The first step of the wizard, it's asking, do I want to paint select an area where, or areas where I need greater polygonal density? In this case, I do not. So I'll click next. And this is the result I came up with earlier. But because I have a solid object, these were capped. So I just went in and deleted those. But we'll do this from scratch. I also went in and added some stroke guides here, but I'll just show how you do that. You don't necessarily have to, Many times, depending on the simplicity of the object, I will let 3D Coat try on its own without any guides first. Many times it will do a very good job, but just depending on the complexity, and especially if it's not a symmetrical object, it can't hurt to add a few guides if you have the time. Okay, so with stroke guides, let's just brush. And I added these loops here to make sure that it's very even topology all the way up the sleeve until it gets to the shoulder area. And you don't have to make these loops connect. You just need to give it some hints to let it know that you want edge loops here. Now in general, it will try to determine where you have sharp creases. It will assume you want to place a loop there, so I don't necessarily have to place anything here. Let's see how it works.